Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 847 for November 29th, 2020. Coming up in a few minutes.
I'd like to think they're investing in these casks, not necessarily in the financial sense of investing, although that may be in the back of their minds, but they're kind of personally investing in what we're doing.
Cask sales, barrel picks, whatever you want to call them, they're becoming more popular, even as casks themselves become harder to find. Chris Ratcliff will have that story for us on this week's WhiskyCast In-Depth. That's just ahead, along with the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Your Voice, and on Behind the Label.
Both the blending of single malt whiskies and also the blending of grain whiskies, albeit grain whiskies made in pot stills and single malts in Scotland, certainly went on from the very, very early 1800s, if not into the late 1780s, 1790s.
The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
And now, a Thanksgiving message from Robin Redbreast.
What am I thankful for? Being on the smaller end of the bird scale.
Happy Thanksgiving from Redbreast, proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
Hey whiskey fans, I'm Gabriel Cardarella, brand ambassador for the world's most awarded blended Scotch whiskey, Dewar's. You could probably guess I've got a lot of stories, but for me, the good ones have one thing in common. They're best told over a glass of whiskey. So hit pause, grab your bottle of Dewar's, and let's get back to this episode of WhiskyCast.
Let's get started with the news. U.S. distillers will be busy on Tuesday making phone or Zoom calls, in addition to making whiskey. Industry groups are calling for a Day of Action campaign to put pressure on Congress to take action on an extension of the current federal excise tax break that largely benefits small-scale distillers. That break expires at midnight New Year's Eve unless it's either extended again or made permanent. Otherwise, the federal excise tax rate on distilled spirits returns to a flat rate of $13.50 per proof gallon. For the last 3 years, distillers have only had to pay $2.70 per proof gallon on the first 100,000 proof gallons they remove from bonded storage for sale each year. As we've reported many times in the past, most small distilleries never even come close to that threshold over the course of a year. That means they'll be facing the equivalent of a 400% tax hike unless there's an extension. While the formal deadline is December 31st, Margie Lehrman of the American Craft Spirits Association says the real-world deadline is just a few days away.
We do know that there must be some sort of additional government funding, as the government's budget will cover them only through December 11th. So whether it's in the form of a continuing resolution or an appropriations bill for however long, we will try and hitch our issue onto that train. There is also still the possibility of a stimulus package coming together, which would be another legislative vehicle in which we could work. However, with each passing day, that reality looks slimmer and slimmer in terms of it happening.
On top of that, Congress is currently scheduled to adjourn December 18th, and the current bills to extend the tax break will expire when Congress adjourns. That means the process will have to start all over again from scratch when the next Congress begins in January. The Irish Whiskey Association held its Chairman's Awards ceremony virtually Thursday night. Each outgoing chairman picks members of the Irish whiskey industry to honor as their 2-year term in office ends, and this was Connacht Whiskey Company founder David Stapleton's turn to select the honorees. The 2020 awards went to Middleton Master Blender Billy Layton, Bushmills Master Blender Helen Mulholland, longtime Master Distiller Noel Sweeney of Powers Court Distillery, and David Hines of Great Northern Distillery, along with posthumous awards to Dingle co-founder Oliver Hughes and Dr. Pierce Lyons. Tullamore Dew's John Quinn is expected to become the new chairman of the association on January 1st. He's been serving as the vice chairman for the last 2 years. The final vote comes at the association's general meeting next Wednesday. Meanwhile, another new Irish whiskey distillery has received the green light for construction. Waterford Council has granted planning permission for Gortinor Distillers to convert a historic wool mill along the River Main into the county's third distillery. Gortinor currently produces the Natterjack Irish whiskey using sourced whiskey and plans to invest around €7 million into the project, with construction expected to start early next year. We do have new whiskeys to talk about this week as well. Ardbeg will be releasing a new 25-year-old single malt during December in Sweden, with the rest of the world getting it early next year. That includes the U.S., where it'll have a recommended retail price of $850 a bottle. Glen Scotia has added a new 30-year-old single malt to its lineup. It dates back to 1989 and was matured in European oak ex-sherry hogsheads. Only 500 bottles will be available worldwide. The recommended retail price in the UK is £850 a bottle. That's around $1,130 at current exchange rates. Scotland's Bladnoch Distillery is kicking off a new range called the Waterfall Collection, which will have a different annual limited edition release for the next 5 years. Bladnoch's Nick Savage has been going through the distillery's warehouses and selecting ex-bourbon and Oloroso sherry casks to be blended together. Future releases will take those same whiskies and finish them in different types of casks. Bladnoch owner David Pryor told me this week that the project allows them to take advantage of the variety of casks laid down by the Armstrong family before he bought Bladnoch 5 years ago.
We've got quite a lot of whiskey, aged whiskey, in small, we've got a 2001, we've got a 2007, we've got a 2003, we've got various little parcels, and, we can do something creative with each of those parcels, and we can release 400 cases, we can release 600 cases. We're not hamstrung in having to do very long runs and obviously with a blend completely different. But so that's something I think we've become a lot better at is doing, limited releases.
The first Waterfall Collection release is available only at the distillery and the Bladnoch website for £100 a bottle. You can watch my interview with David Pryor from his home base in Melbourne, Australia, later this week at WhiskyCast.com. Hunter Lang & Company is releasing 2 new Scarabus Isla single malt bottlings. The 10-year-old and batch strength editions will be available worldwide. Scarabus 10-year-old will sell for about £45 a bottle, while the batch strength version will sell for £49 a bottle. Meanwhile, Cavalan has introduced its first new whiskies since master distiller and whiskey maker Ian Chang left earlier this year. The Artists series is made up of 4 single cask whiskies with a peated malt, virgin oak, French wine cask, and a puncheon cask. They're being sold as individual bottles in Taiwan with a price of $425 each, along with 198 sets of the complete 4-bottle collection. India's Paul John Whiskey is out with its 2020 Christmas edition. It's a combination of ex-bourbon, Oloroso sherry, and virgin oak casks with a touch of peated malt. It's bottled at 46% ABV and has a recommended retail price of around $85 a bottle. I received a sample this week. I'll have my tasting notes for it soon at WhiskyCast.com. In the U.S., Proof and Wood Ventures is releasing the first whiskey in its curated collection. It's called 100 Seasons and is a 25-year-old American light whiskey distilled in 1992 at what was then known as the Seagram's Distillery in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. Today we know it as MGP. Light whiskey in the U.S. is a special category that allows for distilling to a higher proof than standard whiskeys, along with being matured in used barrels. This whiskey was finished in used rye whiskey barrels for 8 weeks back in 2018 and spent the last 2 years resting in stainless steel tanks. 500 bottles will be available at a recommended retail price of around $350 each. Finally, a few milestones to acknowledge this week. Alistair Anderson of the Glenrothes is celebrating his 40th anniversary in the whiskey business. He's been distillery manager there since 2011. Retired Gordon and MacPhail managing director Michael Urquhart has been named president of the International Wine and Spirits Competition for 2021. And earlier this month, we reported on a change in the editor's chair at Whiskey Advocate magazine. Now there's a change at Whiskey magazine as well. Christopher Coates has taken over as editor following Rob Allinson's second stint in the job. Rob will continue to work with the magazine as a contributor. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at WhiskyCast.com. Time now for the calendar of events brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. First, here's an update on plans for the Victoria Whiskey Festival, scheduled for January 14th through the 17th in Victoria, British Columbia. At the beginning of this month, we reported that ticket sales had been pushed back until this coming Friday and Saturday. That has now been changed again to give everyone more time to see what public health restrictions will likely be in place on festival weekend. Tickets will now go on sale January 8th through the Hotel Grand Pacific as part of a hotel and ticket package, with tickets for individual master classes going on sale the next morning online through the Strath's website at strathliquor.com. More details are available at the festival's website. We have a link at whiskycast.com. Meanwhile, Louisville's annual Bourbon and Benevolence charity event has gone virtual this year. It's online now with a whiskey auction that runs through December 11th. Buffalo Trace Distillery kicks off its annual Lighting of the Trace Holiday Light Show this coming Thursday night, and it'll continue nightly through January 1st. Harry's Fine Wine and Spirits has a Dewar's Single Malts virtual charity tasting on the 8th with Holly Sidewand. Bonham's has its next whiskey auction on the 9th in Edinburgh, Scotland. And the Taipei Whiskey Club's final meetup of 2020 is that same night in Taipei, Taiwan. Finally, McTeers wraps up its auction schedule for 2020 on December 16th in Glasgow, Scotland. We're updating the calendar of events at WhiskyCast.com throughout the week as we get word of changes to existing events and details on 2021 dates, too. The calendar of events is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of Virginia's most awarded spirits, including their brand new rye whiskey finished in Catoctin Creek's own Short Hill Mountain Peach Brandy barrels. Peach Barrel Select Rye Whiskey is on sale now at the distillery in Purcellville, Virginia, and wherever you find Catoctin Creek whiskeys. Visit the Where to Buy page at catoctincreekdistilling.com for details, and please drink responsibly.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Gabriel Cardarella again, the Doers guy. I've seen a lot in my years as brand ambassador for the world's most awarded blended scotch. Like the time I got to hold an actual letter written by Andrew Carnegie. A letter from 1891. In it, asking Doers to ship a keg of whiskey to President Benjamin Harrison at the White House. Spoiler alert, we did. And the bourbon folks were not too happy about it. Pretty cool, right? Well, here's another story for you. In 2019, our master blender, Stephanie Macleod, became the first woman to be awarded Master Blender of the Year by the International Whiskey Competition. And a year after that, she won it again. Stephanie's first creation for Dewar's 15 year, is another piece of history. Sweet, floral, with notes of honey and toffee, a perfectly balanced addition to the Dewar's lineup. It's a great introduction to scotch for beginners, and it's more than complex enough to satisfy whiskey aficionados. So grab some Dewar's 15, call some friends, and make a few stories of your own. That's what a good bottle of whiskey is all about.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by the 2020 Distillers Edition collection. We got word this week that Edinburgh's Holyrood Distillery is creating a special series of casks to be auctioned through whiskeyhammer.com starting this Friday. The 30 casks will be filled with spirit distilled from vintage barley varieties and yeast strains early next year, with the bidding to include bonded warehouse maturation for 10 years, annual samples, and more. It's just one example of the growing worldwide demand for entire casks of whiskey. WhiskyCast correspondent Chris Ratcliff has been looking into the growth of cask sales and has more on the story from London.
While it is quite normal to buy whiskey by the dram or by the bottle, what about if you want to go bigger? And I mean much bigger. Cask sales have been around as long as whiskey has, traditionally sold to retailers to fill bottles for customers, but now buying a cask of whiskey is for those looking for something different or unique to call their own. Some distilleries allow you to buy casks of fully matured whiskey, the most famous of these being Jack Daniel's. You can tell the folks in Lynchburg what sort of Jack Daniel's you like, and they'll help you select a cask, have it bottled, and shipped to you. The price starts at $10,000 plus taxes and shipping for approximately 250 bottles. Others allow you to choose a finish that already matured whiskey will take for a few months prior to bottling. Maker's Mark have a selection of staves that can be put into the whiskey cask in different combinations to add different flavours, and these often become the picks that appear in specialist retailers. Buying a cask filled with new make spirit to be matured at the distillery used to be quite common. However, with the boom in whiskey sales, many distilleries have concentrated on building up their own stocks. If you want to buy a cask to follow through its maturation, then young distilleries are a good place to look. Max Vaughan from White Peak Distillery told me on Zoom what cask sales mean for distilleries.
The obvious one is some early cash flow for a new business that, if you're in the situation that we're in, we were a complete startup. So, when you think that it might take 18 months to build your distillery and then a minimum of 3 years before you've got, at least one cask that's capable of being called whiskey. So arguably another probably 3.5 years before you've got enough casks to look at doing an early bottling if you choose to do so. But you have got that sort of period of, let's say, 5 years minimum where you've got, no cash flow from your principal product. It was kind of in the mix as to, the considerations that we went through in terms of the cask program that we had. But I think, we look at it more longer term in the sense that, hopefully we're building up a community of people who, are into what we're doing as a new distillery. I'd like to think they're investing in these casks, not necessarily in the financial sense of investing, although that may be in the back of their minds, but they're kind of personally investing in what we're doing. Certainly many of our cask owners had tried our spirit before they decided to buy a cask. And, we've sold 50 casks, and we've now got hopefully a small community of ambassadors who, are out there sort of talking about, the cask investment they've made and also the story of why they've made it. And I think those individual stories or individual group stories, hopefully get out into the marketplace and just start to spread the word for us about this new distillery, in our case in Derbyshire, but also that we've got whiskey coming down the road.
Newly filled casks tend to be cheaper to buy up front, and while it then takes many years to mature, you can sample the whiskey over the years to see how it progresses. Casks from White Peak Distillery are £3,333 initially, or about $4,500, with bottling and taxes to follow. However, White Peak Distillery doesn't just use cask ownership for engaging with customers.
And one of the things that has been kind of close to my heart personally for as long as I can remember is litter picking. Even when I was a kid, my mum will tell you, occasionally I'd get kind of just exasperated about the amount of litter along the road from our house, and I'd go and grab a black bin liner and go and pick it all up. And I've always done that throughout my life. So I'm a keen runner, keen cyclist, enjoy walking with the family. And pretty much, certainly when I'm running and walking, I'm always picking up litter. We've got the same kind of litter problem that people experience the country over. And I just thought, look, let's try and kind of do something about that. And maybe we can put together a local group of volunteers to do a litter pick from time to time. And, let's try and involve the distillery in some way. So we contributed a cask of our new make to the community for this litter pick, which we kind of renamed it as a whiskey pick. And I mean, certainly pre-COVID, we've done a litter pick every quarter since August 2017. So the first litter pick we ever did was before we even received our stills. And it's been a really nice thing for us. We've got, a relatively small group of people who have now been kind of do every single litter pick we've done. Once you've done 4 or more, then you qualify as an owner of this community cask. And we're going to just carry on rolling with it and just kind of build it in as part of our DNA.
What about if your tastes are a bit more specific? There is a large, though secretive, market for casks being bought and sold between individuals, brokers and independent bottlers. I spoke to Toby Cutler, Global Head of Buying for Atom Brands, who sell whisky under the Master of Malt and Boutique Whisky labels, and asked, how easy is it to buy a cask of whisky?
Very and awfully difficult at the same time. It depends which one you want to buy. If you want to buy a very good cask of Ardbeg, it's very difficult. The whisky that's on the market are, by definition, the whisky that didn't have a use at the distillery. When there's an overstock, what do you need to do? You need to sell the stock, realise the cash, and then you can move forward. So a lot of the stock that's on the market is stock that was surplus for a distillery. Therefore, you're talking things like refill casks a huge amount of the time. You don't find first fill casks really on the secondary market. It's quite hard to go into the market and go, right, I would like a first fill cask of Lafroig because we need that for our upcoming boutique promotion. You just can't really do that. Maybe 10 years ago you could, but it's so popular now that it's really hard to do that. If it's something that's really hard to find, you probably just buy it on spec, actually, because nowadays, if you don't, you call back 2 days later when you've asked for a sample and they're like, oh, sorry, I sold it. It's just gone. And that is a reflection of a lot of whiskey investment that's happening now. A lot of people around the world are putting their money into whiskey. Obviously, everyone's read in the Financial Times that whiskey's better than gold and all that kind of stuff. So, of course, you get these floods of people coming in from people who were dealing in sugar or coffee the day before. And now like, oh, I can make a buck in whiskey, so let's do that. And unfortunately, that's kind of spoiling it to a certain extent for those of us who want to put good whiskey in a bottle. So what you have to do is say, right, okay, we've got this parcel of casks on offer. This sort of fits what we need for our purposes coming up. Yeah, that's a refill cask. Maybe it's a great spirit, but it probably needs a little bit of help. So you say, okay, well, we'll re-rack it ourselves. We're in a fortunate position in that, we have our own maturation warehouse. And so we can do that. Obviously, other third-party warehouses can do it. It comes at a cost. And, that's why you see the price of whiskey creeping up a lot, is because for a lot of independents, there's an awful lot of cost involved nowadays.
If you want to buy a cask of whisky and bottle it yourself, there are many things to consider. Depending on your country, there are local taxes, restrictions on where certain products can be bottled, and more. Martin Armstrong runs whiskybroker.co.uk, who both buy and bottle whisky for themselves and customers. I asked Martin via Zoom what people often get wrong when trying to buy a cask of whisky.
You mentioned tax at the start, and that would be the most common mistake that a single owner makes. Tax is £28.74 per litre of pure alcohol. So on a bottle at sort of 50% would be £10.06 plus VAT. So £12, and then you've also got the VAT on the value of the alcohol as well. So that £12 and times 240 bottles it's up on £3,000 tax, and it's usually more than that. It's usually £4,000. People think it's a great investment or it's a cheap bottle of whiskey, which it might well be, but it's still an expensive overall price. When you actually are faced with a pallet with 300 or 250 bottles of whiskey, you realize that you're still going to have to do something with this whiskey. And if you were to drink it all, you'd drink yourself to an early grave. A group of 10 people is ideal because you might get 24 bottles each and you can give a few away. You can drink a couple, you can keep a couple and not feel like they're a burden to you rather than a pleasure.
And as Martin describes, whiskey clubs can be a great way to see how your own whiskey matures.
For clubs, you have to know when they want to have the whiskey. So if they're planning on buying a cask every year with the aim of the first bottling in 10 years' time, then it's easy. You pick a new make spirit, something that's young, low risk. They can have the full experience of picking the cask and tasting it through the years. Older whiskies, then the club or the society might have to settle for a whiskey that they weren't particularly interested in. You know, there's a much more limited choice of the older whiskies. I would always recommend the younger the better because of the risks. It breaks you into the industry gently.
Andrew Watson from the British Bourbon Society joined me to share what cask picks mean to the club.
The reason why we wanted our own picks is because when you have a single barrel, it's something unique. It's something that you have picked. Obviously, it's from that distillery, so it showcases that distillery, but it's also a departure from the norm. It shows what they are capable of, uncut and unfiltered, in a way that suits your palate. We'd like to get a broad range of tasters, not just within the people that run the group, but within the group itself. And I think having that engagement invests as much of the passion we put in with the members as well, because they get to be a part of picking the barrel, and it's a really cool experience.
For those with deeper pockets who want something particularly rare and unique, Diageo have made a small inventory available under their Casks of Distinction programme using stocks from all 28 of their active distilleries and some from the closed distilleries too. Todd Bradbury, head of rare and collectible whiskies for Justerini and Brooks in London, who are an agent for the programme, told me more via Zoom.
The process generally for a customer when they come to us and wanting to buy a cask, they tend to predominantly come via our distilleries. So we have 11 distilleries where we have a dedicated visitor centre. Normally inquiries come directly through there, and then a large percentage of our inquiries actually come via current clients who have a good relationship with Justerini and Brooks, who are then advised to come and speak to us about an ownership of a whole cask of aged whiskey stock. They tend to be very much thought out and considered. It's more of a passion purchase, if you like. And, you know, sometimes clients come to us with specific requests, but the journey really is about finding out what they do or don't like, which we try to bring to life with tastings virtually at the moment, but clearly quite often in person or at distilleries where we can host them. Some people approach us saying, I would love to find a cask of X, Y, and Z, and it might be a Lagavulin, it might be a Mortlach, it might be a Talisker, and then they might end up leaving with a Klein Leash. Such is the nature of the beast, really, is that it very much is a personalised service where we try to put the right kind of liquids in front of individuals. So it very much is a journey not only on taste and flavour, but also the distillery, meeting the whiskey makers, you know, potentially coming to see new sites that they haven't seen before. So it is really that journey of discovery, which quite often individuals go on to actually decide on what they would like. Quite often clients return for second, third, fourth cask. Through the program, they understand the quality of the liquids, and they understand the selection process, and they understand that the liquids will be of such a fantastic premium that they might order more than one, which is fantastic. Ghost distilleries are highly sought after, but not always capable of being able to get hold of, mainly due to the liquid being scarce. We can cite two fantastic distilleries like Port Ellen and Brora, and, you know, it's never far from a customer's mind quite often to ask for something like that, but we're not always able to fulfill that dream. The whiskies that we focus on tend to be 21 years and above, and we do really have access to that breadth of liquid from the 28 open distilleries and a handful of closed distilleries. The requests sometimes are also around a specific date. 1972 Brora, for example. I'm just about to turn 50 years old. I'm looking for something around about 48, 49 years old. Equally, for some of the younger clientele, I'm looking for a 1982, as quite often some of these things are gifts for the next generation or children or grandchildren as well. We have some wonderful Lagavulin fans in Europe who cobbled together to buy their first cask a few years ago. But I guess the beauty of Justerini and Brooks is you're able to own a slice of the Cask of Distinction story through our brokerage program. If there are collectors and connoisseurs amongst us, it's very easy to go and buy one of these bottles on our broking website, where you can have a slice of the pie really without having to buy 100, 200, 500 bottles of a single cask whiskey. And what we're also noticing, which is amazing, is a collective of Cask of Distinction owners who are incredibly interested in not only buying and selling, but also swapping their bottles. And I think that that's beautiful. I think that now we've come full circle, really, because we're fascinated by cask, but actually it only really becomes something, in my eyes, when we bottle it. And that's when the product then becomes available, a wider cast that people can try it. And, that for me is when it's absolutely fantastic, when you can get bottle in hand, crack it open with some friends and share it on a fantastic occasion.
And if you're wondering what a cask of Port Ellen or Lagavulin might set you back, well...
Yeah, so our casks tend to start around about the six-figure, so £100,000 mark, and go into the millions. The pricing is inclusive of packaging, labelling and finishing of the product. But any pricing that we would quote is net of duty and taxes. So not to get too bogged down in the complexity and the details, but individuals would have to be able to import themselves into the country of their choice and pay the local duty and taxes.
So whether to collect, enjoy or share, buying a cask of whiskey can be a fun adventure in understanding a distillery's output better and seeing how spirit changes over time. Plus, there is something special about having a completely unique whiskey all your own. For WhiskyCast, I'm Chris Ratcliff.
Just a caveat for US-based whiskey fans, it's almost always not possible for individuals or whiskey clubs to purchase a cask directly from a distillery for legal reasons. If you are trying to get a cask from a US distillery, it may be possible to work with a local retailer in your area to get a cask through them. And when it comes to casks from distilleries in other countries, you will have to work with a federally licensed importer. Either way, be prepared to pay a bit extra for the privilege. Now, if your collecting tastes run to rare bottles instead of casks, that part of the market is also at levels we've never quite seen before. While the number of online-only whiskey auction sites has exploded in recent years, more of the old-school auction houses have jumped on board as well. For instance, Sotheby's has been holding wine auctions for years that included bottles of whiskey from time to time. Now, Sotheby's is holding standalone whiskey auctions in London, Hong Kong, and New York. In fact, there were 3 Sotheby's whiskey auctions in the last month, with nearly $4.6 million in sales.
Interestingly enough, last year, we went from the previous year, we were 3% of our sales was spirits. Last year was 13%. And so far this year, it's 19%. So really, it's been an incredible growth market for us and really continues to be.
Jamie Ritchie heads up the wine and spirits team at Sotheby's. We'll have more of my conversation with him on the next episode of WhiskyCast. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by the 2020 Distillers Edition collection lineup of single malts from Diageo's Classic Malts. Look for this year's editions of Oban, Talisker, Lagavulin, Cragganmore, Dalwhinnie, and Glenkinchie at a whiskey shop near you. And get the details at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Since this weekend would have been Whiskey Live weekend in Dublin before the pandemic, let's start off with a couple of Irish whiskies. First up, Tealing Whiskey's new Black Pitts Peated Irish Single Malt. It's the second release of whiskey distilled at Tealing's distillery in Dublin's Liberties, and it's also the first peated whiskey made in Dublin in decades. It's matured in a combination of ex-bourbon and Sauterne wine casks and bottled at 46% ABV. The nose has a good peaty character, along with touches of grilled pineapple, dried flowers, honey, and vanilla. The taste has nice spicy touches of cinnamon and white pepper, balanced by peat smoke, grilled pineapple tartness, and hints of honey and vanilla. The finish? Long, smoky, and tart with a gentle spiciness. I'm scoring the Black Pitts Peated Single Malt from the Tealing Whiskey Company a 92. Next up, the folks behind the Grace O'Malley Irish Whiskey brand have released Proclamation Blended Irish Whiskey. It's made from grain and malt whiskies distilled at Great Northern Distillery in Dundalk, Ireland, and bottled at 40.7% ABV. The nose is fruity and floral, with dried fruits, berries, fresh flowers, and hints of honey and caramel candy. The taste has notes of butterscotch, caramel candy, tree fruits, soft spices, and hints of figs and malt. The finish is long and aromatic with hints of figs, tree fruits, soft spices, and just a touch of oak. I'm scoring Proclamation Irish Whiskey an 89. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. Friday the 13th may be thought of as unlucky, so Sagamore Spirit celebrates Rye Day the 13th instead. And Sagamore Spirit is offering you the chance to win your own barrel of whiskey. Sorta, kinda. Find out more at sagamorespirit.com/Rye Day the 13th. The contest ends on December 31st, and Sagamore Spirit reminds you to always drink responsibly. Now, Irish whiskies are known for being triple distilled, with a few exceptions. But triple distillation is relatively rare outside of Ireland, especially at distilleries that traditionally double distill. India's Amrit distillery has released its first experiment with triple distillation, the Triparva single malt. It's bottled at 50% ABV. The nose has a bit of maltiness along with touches of oak sawdust, molasses, dried fruits, and tobacco. The taste has a good balance of spices, licorice, oak tannins, molasses, and a hint of tobacco. And the finish has lingering spices with a malty character that comes alive, along with hints of molasses and dried fruits. I'm scoring the Amrit Triparva a 91. I finally got a chance to taste the Suntory AO World Whiskey. It's a blend of whiskies from some of Beam Suntory's distilleries in Scotland, Ireland, Canada, the U.S., and Japan. And it's available now in global travel retail after being available only in Japan for a couple of years. It's bottled at 43% ABV. The nose has notes of sawdust, honey, vanilla, dried flowers, and a hint of pine needles. The taste is sweet with honey and butterscotch, balanced by subtle spices and that same hint of pine needles. The finish is long with lingering spices and hints of honey and butterscotch. I'm scoring the Suntory AO World Whiskey a 92. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,000 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Hiya, Mark. How's my favourite New Jersey Redbreast fan doing? Look, I'm going to address the elephant in the room right away. We both know your podcast is dying for a co-host. And I know just the lad who can be the Robin to your Batman. How's that for dropping a hint?
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Just a quick reminder, if you missed Friday night's Happy Hour webcast, the replay is always available on demand at the WhiskyCast YouTube channel. My guests Friday night were Greg Swartz, the director of the new documentary film The Water of Life, Chris Ratcliff, and author Margaret Waterbury. Her new book, Scotch, A Complete Introduction to Scotland's Whiskies, is available at booksellers now in time for the holidays. This week I'll be joined by Daryl McNally, the master distiller for the Dublin Liberties Distillery. Join us Friday at 5 p.m. New York time on YouTube, the WhiskyCast Facebook page, Twitter, and Periscope. Time to open up the inbox now for your voice. Next time around, I'll be announcing December's Whiskey Club of the Month. There is still time to nominate your whiskey club. Just use the contact form at whiskycast.com. Each month's winning club receives 24 WhiskyCast Glencairn glasses to use at their club tastings. I mention that because earlier this year, we picked the 1875 Whiskey Club of Dublin, Ireland, as a Club of the Month. This week, the postman delivered a package from the club's Enda McKenna with one of their club's own Glencairns and a club pin. As I mentioned back in June, the club is made up of Dublin Fire Brigade members, and the 1875 refers to the year of the Great Whiskey Fire in Dublin. I posted a photo of the glass and pin on our social media feeds, and Declan Rice sent this reply on Instagram. Thanks for the shout-out. We can't wait to use the glasses you sent over when COVID passes and we manage to get together again. Thanks, Declan, and if all goes well, I hope to join you over there for a dram sometime in 2021. We posted a news story the other day on whiskycast.com on that push to extend the federal excise tax break for small-scale distillers and the potential for layoffs and other cutbacks in the next few weeks if Congress does not extend that tax break. Brian Drell, at BDrell on Twitter, responded with this. Wait, are people not buying craft booze? I know I am, and more than I normally would. I hear alcohol consumption is up a tad. I guess people are buying rot gut? Well, Brian, home alcohol consumption is up this year in the U.S. and most other countries because of the pandemic. But keep in mind that in the U.S., the vast majority of small-scale distillers get most of their revenue from sales at their in-house tasting rooms. That business has been decimated because the pandemic forced many distilleries to shut down their tasting rooms and tours. As of now, we only have anecdotal evidence of distilleries that have gone out of business this year, since some may have shut down temporarily and plan to reopen once there's a vaccine available, and distilleries are not required to turn in their federal distillery permit if they shut down. If you have a question, suggestion, gripe, or anything else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and all of those other things that make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. Many books about Scotch whiskey's history credit Andrew Usher as the person who came up with the idea of blending whiskies from different distilleries. In fact, though, there was more than one Andrew Usher. The original Andrew Usher was born in 1782. He was a brewer who started experimenting with blending whiskies before Aeneas Coffey patented his column still in 1830. But it was two of Andrew's sons, Andrew Usher II and John Usher. They took their father's work and built on it by blending malt whiskies with the grain whiskey produced by those coffee stills. But were the Ushers pioneers? Not even close. Nick Morgan of Diageo is a whiskey historian. He has spent the last couple of years researching and writing the new book, A Long Stride, which covers the complete history of Johnnie Walker. The brand is celebrating the 200th anniversary of John Walker opening his original grocery store in Kilmarnock, Scotland, back in 1820. And while John Walker started out blending teas, it wasn't long before he was blending whiskies.
The claim that's made for Usher, which is as far as I can discover without any substantiation whatsoever, so I don't quite understand where it came from. But the claim that's made for Usher is sort of first blender on a commercial scale. Okay. Now, the fact of the matter is that we know that whiskey blending, both the blending of single malt whiskies and also the blending of grain whiskies, albeit grain whiskies made in pot stills and single malts in Scotland, certainly went on from the very, very early 1800s, if not into the late 1780s, 1790s. And most of the shopkeepers, I imagine, in Kilmarnock, along with John, were blending their own whiskies of one sort or another. I mean, and we know he had a couple of very well-established competitors who were actually taken over by the Walker business in the course of time. So blending was going on all over Scotland way before Usher's even looked at it. Were Usher's first blenders on a commercial scale? Well, no, I don't think so. If I look at John Walker's business and the way it was in the 1860s and other businesses that were around as well, I'm not claiming primacy for Walker's, but I just think there were so many other people doing it. It's difficult and, in a sense, futile to try and claim to be the first. You know, I mean, the thing about Walker's, they wouldn't have bothered about being the first in this instance. They just wanted to be the best. You know, that was what drove them.
Nick Morgan also appears in the new documentary film about Johnnie Walker, The Man Who Walked Around the World. It's now available to stream online at themanwho.com. We'll have the entire interview with Nick Morgan on an upcoming episode, and this also was his final project for Diageo. He'll be retiring after 30 years with the company and its predecessors, and he'll share some hints about his future book plans in that interview. If there's something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot. The tears of Ireland's great writers bursting with flavour, humour and angst. Bottled for you to taste. No writers were harmed in the making of this premium Irish whiskey. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, cocktail recipes, and food recipes with whiskey involved. And you'll also, of course, find a complete archive of all of our past episodes dating back to 2005. I love to hear from you. You can always get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
At Doers, we love a good story, and that's why we're always writing new chapters. Like our Illegal Smooth finished in mezcal casks, with notes of sliced green pepper and a wisp of smoke. A world's first, Illegal brings cultures together for something truly unique. As a 174-year-old brand, we could rest on our laurels. Instead, we'd much rather continue writing. Because when you keep telling the same old story, that's when people stop listening.
And now, a Thanksgiving message from Robin Redbreast.
What am I thankful for? Being on the smaller end of the bird scale.
Happy Thanksgiving from Redbreast, proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2020, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening, and please stay safe.